Aloha kākou pau. Once again, we're bringing you Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's future. I'm Kai Upua Fife with the Kiwani Foundation, coming to you today from Kawai High on the Hawaii Island. Another beautiful day here, part of our trip around the island doing interviews with various people. And today we're very happy to have with us Jeff Satcher. Jeff, welcome. Thank you for taking the time for being down here with us. We're over on this side of the island, talking with people such as yourself, trying to get a handle on what some of the topics and the issues are and who's involved, and just looking for general information that maybe the public is not aware of if they're not really deeply involved in some of these issues. And maybe for starters, Jeff, you could just give us a little background on yourself, who you are, kind of what you do, where your interests are, and then what issue is grabbing you most emotionally at this point in your life.
I moved over here from the mainland, got over here about 3.5 years ago, had been visiting the island, and particularly liked the Big Island because it was wide open. It wasn't as blown over as some of the other islands. I liked the area quite high because where I came from, it's pretty hot and dry, and so this suited me as well. Completed building a home, and in the process now of looking for work here on the islands. My background is in sales. I may stay in that, may get to something else. Interests, I have never really been interested in government. Since I moved over here, I started getting more involved in that. I am a paddler with Kauai High Canoe Club and enjoy that, and I swim, and have gotten involved in a lot of the outdoor activities here. So it really it suits my lifestyle extremely well.
Well, a lot of people like the Big Island because it's a big island.
Well, it is,
you
and
know,
it's so diverse.
You've got a lot of space, and although all of the islands have the different climatic zones, and you mentioned that you prefer the dry, so I guess you're on the right place.
Right.
But it's an island that my ohana comes from, and so as frequently as possible I try to get over here myself. But and usually it's a matter of coming over in association with issues that are facing the community, primarily the Hawaiian community, but some of these issues that affect the broad community are just going to impact all of us, and for a long time to come. So you're finding yourself, after being here for 3 years, developing some interests and some inclinations and directions that you might not have previously. You mentioned government, so and I think we're maybe talking politics and things that go along with that.
Right.
So what's one of the issues that you're dealing with here, or at least, or perhaps wrestling with?
Well, there are a few, but I think the one that is the top on my concerns is Hawaii Super Ferry. When I first read about it, I think it was like June of '04, and I read in West Hawaii Today that there was going to be a ferry coming here, and actually I was really excited because I heard it was coming to Kauai High. Figured, great, I don't have to go to the airport, it's very close. I can, we have relatives over on Maui, so I can get over on Maui in no time at all and come back that day, and it was wonderful. And I read further into the article, and all of a sudden saw that this was a 300+ foot vessel, 4 stories high, and I started wondering, how's this going to be in Kauai High Harbor? How's it going to fit in here? What's going to happen to the area? And really, as a result of that, I started, anytime I'd see anything on the Super Ferry, I'd start reading about it. And I think the first big opening that I had and where I really got involved was in November of '04, when they had, I believe it was the Public Utilities Commission's hearing for the permit to go ahead and start the Super Ferry. And there were a lot of people there who were for it. There were a lot of people there who were for it, but they wanted some questions answered. Right. And I think that's basically where I came from. It sounded like a good idea, but I had...
Looking for more information.
More information. I had my own questions, but in hearing other people who were testifying that night, they brought up things that I didn't think about. A situation with the whales, and I knew that this was an area where the whales come every season. Something I didn't think of was invasive species.
Yeah.
What's going to be brought over to the other island, what our island may bring over to the other outer islands. So from there, I just really started following it. And then just, so you know, toward the end of October, on I guess it was a Yahoo message board. I happened to come in contact with a woman over on Maui, and that's when it all started. And we started talking back and forth, and I've actually met a lot of people on other islands just because of this particular situation.
Well, it sounds like earlier on you were probably getting a lot of your information out of newspapers and perhaps over the news broadcasts and so forth, which is where a lot of people get their information, and which to me is, if all you have to inform yourself is what's in the newspaper, there's usually a lot that's not being distributed in that way. So
You're 100% right, because as a result of reading the newspapers and being connected with these folks on Maui and eventually Kauai, I started learning a lot of things that weren't in the newspapers, and I started asking a lot of my own questions. And in fact, I had friends here on the Big Island who I found out were as interested in as I was, and we actually had a meeting one day for about an hour or two to see, is this something we should be concerned about? And in getting all these people together, everyone was bringing out something new that someone else didn't think about, and we actually formed a little group that started, again, among ourselves, our family and friends here on the Big Island, and then folks that we were put in touch with on the neighbor islands. We started really following it and started going to the Hawaii Super Ferry and Department of Transportation did a lot of presentations, and we would attend those. And every time we went with questions, we left with more questions than when we went in.
You used the term in describing those gatherings as presentations. I didn't attend any of them myself because I've been traveling quite a bit, and I don't know if that was an intentional term to use presentations to mean means I envision an agenda being presented, topics being covered, as opposed to perhaps a community information gathering. Were they actually looking for input from the community, or were they primarily trying to promote information that they had to put forth?
I will be the first to say there's people out there who will probably disagree with me, but myself, I feel very strong in that it was presented as this was going to be talk, story, and exchange among the community. My very sincere feeling is that there was this agenda to get the information out, because if there was that exchange between Super Ferry, DOT, and the community, we wouldn't have the questions that we had.
That's what I see frequently happens, is when there are these presentations taken out to the community, it's usually to at least initiate initial contact, but also that there's an agenda, and that before they even hit the ground, they know what their outcomes need to be, and they usually amazingly achieve them. It's like those facilitative community gatherings in which, wow, isn't it amazing? Everybody agrees with exactly what we brought over here, and
Yes.
and that's the way the reports frequently come out. Well, the important thing is the exchanges that I guess you started to participate in with other interested parties, and that's where, as you say, you get several people involved, each one coming from a different perspective, asking questions that others hadn't even thought of. What are some of the questions that came up that perhaps remain unanswered for quite a while?
One of the big ones, I believe, is the invasive species. People are concerned, like here we have the coqui frog, they don't have it at the other islands, or I think there's maybe a small area in Maui that they have it, the fire ant. And the last thing that I understood was from Agriculture Department, saying that they did studies and found that most things, invasive species, are coming in from overseas. And the question was put to them, but we're not dealing with overseas, we're dealing with inner island. What have you looked at in that way? And I asked, I'm the one who asked the question, and I did not get what I feel was a substantial answer. In other words, I don't think they're going to know until this thing gets moving, and that's something that's a big concern. Another major one was the whale situation, and I actually got in touch with a few people, and they gave me some studies to read, which I'm not usually one to do that kind of thing, but I did this time. And My understanding is that the federal laws say that you have to stay 100 yards away from the whales.
Mm-hmm.
And Hawaii Super Ferry said we've done even better than that. We're staying 500 yards away. And that all sounds good to someone who's reading it, but the fact of the matter is the whales don't have a super ferry avoidance policy.
And
They're-
they don't have traffic lanes,
Exactly.
which they necessarily need to maintain.
So you could say that you have to stay a mile away from the whales, but
Mhm.
when the whales come up, and especially calves, they're very inquisitive,
Mhm.
and they want to know what's going on, and they can pop up. And so, understandably, the PR that's been put out by Hawaii Super Ferry is we have a stricter whale avoidance policy. But the fact of the matter is, if people look at it very closely,
Yeah.
and in fact, NOAA, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's the one they have the boating laws and everything. And they came out a few months back, and I actually have the brochure that said, we recommend in the areas where there is a concentration of whales that you travel between 10 and 12 knots. Super Ferry says they're going to travel 35 knots, but at those times they'll slow down to 25 knots. That's almost twice the speed that's recommended.
Yeah. Well, you know, anyone who's been out on the ocean, especially between the islands here, knows that something can come up right in front of you, and you'll have no idea where it came from, and it's just almost instantaneous, and all of a sudden you have to deal with it. And so saying that you're going to maintain a 500 yard or whatever the distance is kind of ludicrous. It's kind of a wish distance, you know. And the damage that can be done, of course, we can just kind of imagine that. When we're talking about whales, when we couple that with some of the underwater sonic tests that have been conducted, I guess part of the reasoning being to test for temperature gradient variances throughout the ocean and so forth. We still don't know really that there's anything beneficial to be gained sufficient enough to warrant the damage that they're doing to the whale population. You know, terrifying the mammals out there in their home territories. It reminds me when you talk about invasive species, you know, how a lot of the, well, for instance, mosquitoes. How did they get here? Well, the larvae were mostly in the bilge water of the ships that came from elsewhere, which they dumped when they got into Honolulu Harbor. You know, I mean, that's where a lot of that stuff came from. And as far as it not being an issue because we're talking about inter-island travel, there's a lot of concerns about people who are dedicated to native species that they're so discrete. Even within islands, there are species that need to be kept separate to maintain their identity, let alone going between islands. You know, Miley on Hawaii Island is a different Miley than what you see on Kauai, and that's great, and let's keep it that way. But invasive species, that's something that we're totally dealing with. What amazes me in that direction is when I go to the airport to leave Hawaii to go someplace, they're really checking me close. You know, I mean, they want to know what we're taking over to California, right? People coming in, I know there's a little form that people fill out, but there's not the same level of security coming in, so people can just about waltz into Hawaii with anything they want to.
Well, you know, if I may, you mentioned two things about the what you go through at the airport and then the security. And another one of the major concerns that was brought up is the security on these vessels. Now, you got to think about what you're going through in the way of security and being checked at the airport, and that's basically checking your luggage and your body. Now we've got automobiles, trucks that are going to have cargo. People are talking about going, you know, if they want to go to Oahu and buy stuff and come back with full cars. And what I'm wondering is at the airport, they check your ticket and your license. Here, if you go out with a vehicle, you have to have your license, the registration, the insurance form. They've got to check your car, they've got to check you. How are they going to check everything that's in the car? How long is this going to take?
Right.
So,
well, they say at the airports, be prepared to spend 2 hours checking in.
Right.
Come early because it's going to take a big chunk of your day, your travel day, to get on an airplane. If they also have to check your vehicle, or if they're going to, that'll be interesting to see. I guess they had the first runs yesterday, huh? The $5 trips.
Sunday it started, actually.
Sunday, yeah, that's right, on Sunday. And I guess there was a pretty good load on Vol. I don't know how many vehicles actually were transported on that trip. I know a lot of people took kind of a joyride, $5 joyride. But I'm wondering how many vehicles went and whether or not they initiated the level of security that we're wondering about right now, what they did.
I don't know numbers wise, and in fact, you're right. The $5 started on Monday because the Super Ferry was here, I believe, on Sunday for a visit. And it was interesting because one newspaper quoted 1,600 people toured it.
Right.
Another newspaper quoted 2,500. I drove down there twice, and both times, one time I saw one car going in the gate, the other time I saw none. So I'm wondering about if the numbers are really played with.
Well, the one over here, the one that came to Kauai High was kind of an unofficial, it was an informal
Right.
kind of
It was
thing,
just,
right.
it was for people to get to see the vessel and to see, what it was like. But, when I was going down to see if there were people visiting, I was very concerned because, Kauai High, it's a 2-lane highway in front of the harbor. That's another major concern. And in no uncertain terms, Barry Fukunaga with the DOT, when asked at one of the meetings, what are you going to do with the road in front of the harbor? He said there are no plans to widen that road. It will be as it is. That's something that's a big concern. I mean, you know what traffic is like here on the Big Island. And this is something that if more cars are being brought on, we have to mitigate the problems that are going to occur, especially at Kauai High Road and Queen Kahumanu Highway. It's a lot of things that can happen there and within the little town itself. So traffic is another major concern for people on this island as well as Maui and Kauai.
Well, that brings up a question when you say that DOT, at least here at Kauai High, had no plans to alter, improve, enhance traffic approaches or at the embarkation point. One of my concerns to begin with when I first started hearing about rumblings of the Super Ferry was the fact that the developers were getting the state to commit to huge investments in infrastructure upgrades. I think on Maui, I think there were some accommodations at the port that had to be made in order to accommodate the ferries. But are you saying are you aware of nothing being done in that direction over here?
The only thing that I had heard is they had changed where the cars would enter, because it now sounds like they're going to put in a Pier 4. Pier 1 was damaged during the earthquake, so they decided rather than using that, they were going to build Pier 4 down in the Coral Flats. Add Pier 4, which is in I believe it's the 2020 plan. They say that there may be a Pier 4 if necessary due to growth and whatever, and that's all well and good, although a lot of people in the very beginning said, why aren't you putting it down there? Personally, there's a lot of us who believe that because now they are definitely using state land and there will be a permanent facility. Back then, if they had done it, that would have definitely triggered an EIS, but they were saying, no, we're using a barge. But the other thing, and that's what they're going through now with the court cases, is they're using state funds. They got a federal loan guarantee.
Right.
Those are also triggers for the environmental impact statement.
Right.
And people asked for this a long time ago, and if they had done it back then and not tried to skirt the issue, they probably would have been running now without any problems.
Well, at least they could have anticipated the issues, dealt with them. Of course, they would have had to deal with the public, too, in that kind of a environmental assessment.
Well, they're dealing with it. Look how they're dealing with it now in Maui and Kauai.
But typically in Hawaii, let's face it, what developers do is they go ahead with what they want to do, and they don't even beg forgiveness afterwards because it's a done deal, generally speaking. And it looks to me like that's what happened. That's what happened with the Super Ferry. There are some headlines about environmental impact statements and so forth. But as far as I know, the ferries are ferrying. The ferries are floating.
They are, but I do have to tell you, I feel quite good in seeing more and more people writing letters to the editor, getting involved the way they are in Maui and Kauai, here on the Big Island with depleted uranium. I think people are starting to say, you know what, this is a wonderful state. We want to protect it. We don't mind growth, but if you're going to do it responsibly, because it seems like we're constantly using Band-Aids to fix problems rather than thinking things through. And I think this super ferry is one of the major problems that has occurred recently. And I think if it was thought through and if they listened, you know, they say that they listen to the people, but if they really listened, we would have had answers to the questions.
Well, I think a lot of people initially were receptive to, you know, without even asking questions, were receptive to the concept of the ferry, because let's face it, it wasn't too long ago that that was the only way you got between islands, was aboard small ships, small vessels, you know. My mother used to travel between islands on some of the old, they didn't call them ferries, but that's exactly what they did, is they transported people between islands. And before we had inter-island air working, that's how you did it. So I think a lot of people were accepting of that. But I mean, we're kind of in a different kind of an age. You know, we travel around and we've seen ferries in different locations in the world that seem to be working. The difference is those are already in place, and if we're looking at real environmental impacts, and in Hawaii, that's just a reality. Every time we turn around, I think that's something that needs to be really carefully looked at. The other thing is, I'm wondering what's the real motivation? I mean, if we're talking transporting commercial goods or produce or products or equipment in our island, we've been doing that for years with tugs and barges, you know. So the big stuff has been moving. I just missed a bargain flight in conjunction with our trip over here. It would have been $19 on an airplane, you know, and that's pretty hard to beat. Now, of course, it's kind of exceptional, but I mean, even if you go up to 30, 40, 50, 60 bucks, I mean, it's still pretty reasonable cost to get between islands by air. So I'm wondering what other motivation there could be. I mean, because these are some pretty huge vehicles, ocean-going ferries. I mean, these are huge. I was reading a little bit in the paper that they can actually adjust the decks to accommodate different size vehicles.
Right.
So we're not just talking about passenger cars or pickup trucks. I mean, we're talking about, they mentioned buses. You look at the tour buses that travel around Hawaii, these are major pieces of equipment.
Exactly.
So I'm just wondering if there's if there might not be some other agenda for most of this equipment or these transportation needs. Just about any time, from my perspective, anytime big money gets spent, federal money gets spent here in Hawaii, it's because there's a military agenda behind it, and that's you know, you talk about conspiracy theorists. I'm dyed in the wool in that direction, because there always is a conspiracy there. So, and over here, I mean, what's going on right up above? Pahakulo, expansion of the military complex, depleted uranium. My goodness, maybe we can use the ferries to take that away somewhere.
There has definitely from the beginning been a concern as to whether or not this was going to be used by the military. And in fact, on that November meeting that I went to in '04, the paper that was handed out by Hawaii Super Ferry, which said why they're there and why they're looking to get the permit, it specifically in there said, and we are currently in talks with the military.
About possible tangential usage?
Just whatever,
Yeah.
whether it's that they can get it if they get advance notice, they can use it, or it's state of emergency or whatever. And interestingly, a gentleman brought up and he said, you know, my gosh, what better terrorist target than this kind of vessel? You know, we really need to check into this. And there have been continuous to this day that people do believe that there is some kind of connection with the military or some kind of connection with big business because of investors who have invested in it.
You mean the people who put up the money to begin, the developers?
There is one gentleman, John Lehman, who invested, I believe it was $58 million. And if you go to his website and look at the companies that he holds, I believe it's on the left side of the website I looked up, and my recollection is that every one of them had to do with the military except one, and that was a super ferry. And I'm saying, Why would a man who has all these companies dealing with the military invest $58 million in some local inter-island ferry? And I don't know. People may say I'm crazy, and that's fine, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. And these are questions that have been asked. And the Super Ferry has said, well, no, as any good business plan does, we initially were talking to the military. We found out it's not going to work for us, so we're out of talks with them. I'm sorry, I don't believe everything I hear.
Well, getting back once again to initial investors and front money that's put up, and 58 million it's kind of a drop in the bucket, but usually what that kind of money is used is to entice funding from governing entities, the federal government, the state government, and that's exactly what they did. Is they attracted, that 58 million is a drop in the bucket compared to what's going to have to take place as far as infrastructure improvements, enhancements, and the big impact is really going to be borne by the U.S. taxpayers in the state of Hawaii. I mean, this thing is not going to be paying for itself for a long, long time.
Well, and it's been said, we've questioned, there's $40 million in state funds that were allocated. This wasn't a loan, this was allocated for the barges that were built, and there's a $138 million federal loan guarantee.
Yeah.
And people at these meetings were saying, in some of our county council meetings and some of the talk stories with representatives, senators, who's to say that we are not going to have to spend more money in order, if we have more people coming over, how are we going to take care of our parks? What are we going to do with regard to police and traffic and installation of traffic lights? So that it wasn't going to stop right at that, was it $178 million?
Right.
It was going to go further. And this is what the EIS would bring out. This is what people are looking for.
That's the whole point in that process. It's really easy to say, hey, this is not going to have any impact. It's not trust me, it's not going to cost much. But anyway, you bring up some good points and some good questions that I think more and more people have to be considering as it hits the headlines. Maybe these issues that should have been settled years ago can be addressed at this point, and I'm hoping that happens. And appreciate your coming and spending time with us.
Thank you for the time.
This just about winds up this segment. Once again, thanks to Jeff Satcher for coming, sharing your mana'o with us. Thanks for being a productive member of our community here. I'm Kaiopua Fife with the Kiwani Foundation. Mahalo. Come visit us again. Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's future. Hui ho.